All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar to learn about the differences between self-managed versus professionally managed communities. I'm thrilled to have you all join us as we dive into this important topic. My name is Aileen Zarilla, and I am the Business Development Manager for the Broward region here at Castle Group. And I'll be your host for this session alongside my partners, Millie Ventura and Jessica Raffo. And our panel of experts, we have our very own James Shoemaker, Castle Group's Executive Vice President. We have Yvonne Andres, our shareholder at Siegfried Rivera. And from Brown & Brown Insurance, we have the Vice President, Jordan Knowles, and Director of Business Development, Mark Sergio. Throughout the webinar, our panel of experts will navigate the complexities of self-managed and professionally managed communities. Also, they'll shed some light on the advantages, challenges, and considerations associated with each approach. Our goal today is to provide valuable insights and perspectives to empower your community management decisions. Whether you're a homeowner, a board member, or an industry professional, this is for all of you. Before we kick off our discussion, I invite you to actively engage by asking questions in the chat. Let me move this over so you can have, here's our panel of experts, and here's some information about our agenda. And then I wanted to, for those who are new to the Zoom, here's how to submit a question on the chat. To ensure we make the most out of everyone's time, we'll address all questions at the end of the session. So we thank you for your participation and your understanding. And without further ado, I turn it over to our panelists. But first, why don't you all take a moment to introduce yourselves for our audience? So we can start with Millie.
Thank you, Aileen. Well, first of all, a warm welcome to everyone and a big thank you to our esteemed panel of experts for generally sharing their time with us. I'm Millie Ventura, serving as the Business Development Manager for Palm Beach. I have over 25 years of experience in the property management sector and have been with Castle for 5 years. Jess?
Hi, Jessica Raffo here. I am the Director of Business Development, and I head the initiatives in Miami-Dade all the way down to the Keys. Very fun for me because I get to take weekend trips to talk to the board members down there, which is really nice. So please keep calling me. Anyways, we thank you all for taking the time to hang out with us today, and we're really excited for the agenda. It's going to be a wonderful discussion.
Awesome. And I'm James Shoemaker, Executive Vice President, Castle Group. Been with the company now for 8 years, and get to work with the lovely ladies on this on the Zoom with Castle Group and our esteemed vendors. And I'm really looking forward to having a great discussion around this topic that we have today. So really glad to be here.
And I am Jordan Knowles, Vice President with Brown & Brown Insurance, headquartered out of our Fort Lauderdale office. Brown & Brown is a publicly traded firm with about 500 agencies across the world and about 15,000 teammates. Our office here in Fort Lauderdale specializes in the habitational space. We currently insure about 1,500 condo associations between Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. So happy to be here, and thank you all for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yvonne Andres. I'm a partner with the law firm of Siegfried Rivera. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you this afternoon. Siegfried Rivera is a association that represents condominium and homeowner associations. We have a construction defect and construction litigation team, as well as a commercial real estate and property team. We represent over 500 condominium and homeowner associations within the state of Florida. Our offices are located in Coral Gables with satellite offices throughout the state. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Yvonne. Mark?
Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Sergio. I'm the Director of Business Development for Brown & Brown Insurance. Jordan Knowles is one of my partners here in our Fort Lauderdale office. Looking forward to connecting with everybody and seeing how we can assist.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's get the ball rolling. The first topic is, what are self-managed communities? So, what defines self-managed communities? And maybe the panel can detail for us what are the key differences between self-managed and professionally managed associations. Yvonne, would you like to take a stab at it first?
Sure. I'd be glad to take that one. So we view, or at least from my perspective, I view a self-managed association as an association that does not have a professional management company that is managing it. And the self-management aspect can be anything from a board of directors really running the business operations of the association, which you don't usually see as often as the second kind of tier of self-management, which is having an individual, a private person, or possibly employee of the association manage the association, as opposed to a professional management association, or which is where we see professional management companies being hired as an agent for the association to run their day-to-day management.
Thank you so much. And James, maybe you can detail some of the advantages of professional management.
Yeah, well, the obvious answer is self-managed is that they don't have Castle Group. So that's the simple, quick answer, right? But no, as Yvonne said, it's really from a premise of who manages and who owns the fiduciary rights of the association. And I think, for us at Castle Group, it's a big component is really in self-manages. They own, for lack of a better term, the staff. They self-employ their staff, and those types of things that carries is a big weight, both from a financial standpoint and a burden, where they have all the employee issues. And so when you come into professional management, we take that burden, we take that risk, by the way, of having everything from the payroll to the benefits to the career pathing to the onboarding. That comes on the Castle. And then those risks are shifted basically from self-managed to us. But in addition, all those other ancillary services are now taken on by us at Castle Group. So, for example, when we talk about training, when we talk about support, when we talk about all the ancillary things that professional managed associations can bring to them, those are the things we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail, I think, the difference of what you have on self-managed versus the difference between that and a Castle managed association.
Great, thank you, James. And maybe Yvonne and Jordan, you can maybe talk about your experience working with self-managed versus professional management.
Yeah, I would be happy to. And that's a really good segue, James, because you pointed out a couple of things that, if you are to hire a company such as Castle to manage your association, where some of that exposure shifts, right? And when you talk about a self-managed association, the three big insurance policies that come to mind are typically crime, liability, and workers' compensation. So those three items, if you're with a professionally managed company, those items shift onto their plate. Obviously, the association still maintains policies, but they directly protect the association, and they're not so much focused on protecting the property manager, right? Because Castle or any other entity has that fail safe there. So it's kind of an extra added layer of insulation for the association. Versus if you hire your own manager and you are a self-managed association, heaven forbid the manager gets hurt, that is now going on your workers' comp policy. You are directly penalized, and then you're going to have an increase in your premiums coming up. So again, relying on a professionally managed partner can really allow you to release some of that burden, along with a lot of those other items that James had mentioned. So, shifting the burden and the exposure off of your plate to someone like Castle, who does this all day, every day.
Yvonne?
So yeah, and what I think what Jordan said is exactly on point and key. Obviously, there's insurance considerations that need to be taken into account when you're dealing with a professional management as opposed to, or excuse me, self-management as opposed to professional management. With regards to working with legal counsel, associations essentially come to the same point with regards to whether or not they're self-managed or professional managed for legal counsel purposes. There's really no difference in how we treat an association in that manner, but there are differences in what we can access through that association. And what I mean is that a lot of times what you find in self-managed associations is you have this one key person who knows everything about the association. There's no other layers or levels. So for instance, you'd have a property manager is what we usually find, and that's really it. There's no administrative assistance. There's no kind of backup. And that sometimes makes it difficult. because you're really relying, those self-managed associations are really relying on one person. If that one person's great, it's wonderful. If that one person is not so great, it's much more difficult. When you have a team of professional a management team with you, there are layers there. There are people that you can reach out to. If there's something that needs to be done, or there's some issue that needs to be addressed that you can't really get with the on-site team. And I think that's really where the biggest difference is. It's kind of the expanse and the outreach, and how far I can go to kind of get some contact or somebody to assist me in answering some questions that I may have regarding the operation of the association or their overall community.
Yeah, Yvonne, you know, one thing I didn't touch upon, and you just made me think of it when you were talking, is when you talk about the differences or sometimes the advantages of professional management too, back to the employee side, we talk about risk, right? That anything can happen, and all those risks that can happen to the employee are now borne by the professional management. But it's also talking about the employee value proposition. So as an example, as a self-employed association, you don't have the buying power that a castle does. So if you have a staff of 10, your benefits to those employees that work for you are based on that pool of 10. And with over 2,600 teammates, right, it's considerably more. And so I think that that's a big difference in professional managed associations. If you're large enough, like a castle group, where you can bring those, you're enhancing the employee benefits. And you're also doing things that are helping save the bottom line for the association. So as an example, your cost, so it's one thing to have a better benefits package, but the cost for that is the same thing in terms of your aggregate buying pool. So typically we find a huge savings for bringing in Castle Group to the insurance side. And then for the benefits, we've enhanced the benefits package. So those are just small examples of where the benefits goes up and the morale goes up for the employee. We take on the risk, but there actually is a line item savings for the association because of their inability to have the buying power that we do.
Yeah. One thing, if I could jump in before we get away from it, Yvonne made a great point about, you know, if you have that great person in place as your self-managed or as your property manager, that's great. But again, how long is that person going to be there for? You know, because in today's climate, especially from, you know, an insurance shopping perspective, you need a lot of documentation. So did that person leave the repairs? Did they leave the 40-year certification, the 50-year certification? Do you have the engineering reports? Because heaven forbid this individual leaves your association and then a new person comes on. And all the insurance carriers want to know what happened when you fixed this water leak, what happened when you had to get the concrete restoration done. And if you're going back and trying to call the engineers to find out, to find a document that they submitted to the city 10 years ago, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And I know, you know, it's insurance buying is a frustrating process to begin with because the marketplace is very difficult and a lot of associations and boards feel like it's delivered last minute. If you don't have access to these documents, it's only going to further delay that. Again, a company like Castle Group, they've got an entire platform where all this information is listed, right? So you don't have to rely on one individual to have 20 years worth of receipts and repairs, right? You can say, here's our Rolodex and we've got it all right here. So I couldn't tell you how important that is from the perspective of having the documents, especially with how strict everything has become in the last couple of years.
That's a great point, Jordan. Great point.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one thing, just because I recently had a call with a self-managed board, and I think it's pertinent. You know, obviously we're making the case for professional management. I would love for you to hire Castle, but I have met boards that love self-managed and it works really well. But what does that look like? These boards have a lot of time on their hands. They act as the management company. They're putting in hours and hours. Some of them complain 40 hours and upward, right? They don't have time for their family or friends. They certainly don't have time for their career. So what's happening is that we're getting these younger board members who are coming up, and I'm finding that they have families. I'm finding that they have careers and all these things. And they're like, well, Jess, you know, I can't do what the predecessors did. I cannot dedicate all this time. I know of some communities that work wonderfully with self-managed, you know, that sort of approach, but it looks very different. And you have to ask yourself as a board member, do you have that time to dedicate? Because you're going to act as a regional director. You're going to act as the vice president of operations. You know, you're going to be helping in the bidding process and in the acquiring of documentation and all the administrative tasks. So it's just a matter of preference. And I can't imagine that there are too many board members these days that are looking for that kind of burden on them, right?
Yeah. Jess, we always say when Castle comes in, the board can finally enjoy the pool.
Exactly.
Well, that leads me into my next question, actually. So what are some key factors or metrics that the board should consider when deciding between professional management and self-management? And how do these factors ultimately impact the overall well-being and success of the association?
I'll take a quick stab at it, just because when we're talking to prospective clients, you know, and both Millie, Aileen, and Jess, you've heard me say it, and probably you, Mark, and Jordan, but I like saying that we're a really big, small company. And I say that because I just think we're uniquely positioned on what's important for the board to make their decisions with. And, you know, those are some of the factors when they're looking at due diligence or references, or things like that. At the end of the day, it's capability, and capability comes with, if you're too small, you're just not sophisticated. You don't have the investments and reinvestments into technology and systems and processes to really affect positive change and change management. But if you're too large, a lot of times, you know, those companies are driven towards financial results for a publicly traded company or shareholders. And sometimes that's not in the alignment for the board. And so, again, I'm touting Castle for obvious reasons, but I say that because you want a company that has the experience of doing thousands of projects with thousands of employees, but at the same time, they're small enough and intimate enough to where we can actually engage with our executives, our founders on site, and meet with the board members. And so that intimacy and that customized, personalized approach allows us to be the small side of a very large company. So that's one thing that I think is important in board selection and criteria of, you know, what are the benefits that they're looking in their management firm.
Great. Thank you, James. Jordan, you want to chime in on any of that?
Yeah, I definitely can. You know, I don't know that there's necessarily a sweet spot, whether it's a number of units or whether it's a number of buildings that an association may have. I think everybody is a bit unique in that situation. You know, also what's coming down the pipeline for your association is important with that, right? One thing that, you know, it kind of separates, in my mind, the biggest thing that separates self-managed versus the professional managed is the Rolodex and the resources that you have, right? James, you touched on the benefits, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because I've sat in some of the Castle monthly meetings and quarterly meetings, and there's a lot of pain that's shared in those meetings. And I think the intention is from that to make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else, right? So when we have these experiences and we go through these painful headaches, we can then relay that to the rest of our team and say, hey guys, this just happened to us. And if your association is like this, let's make sure that we're proactive, right? Instead of being reactive, which we had to do on association A, well, now we can let this trickle down, get the information out proactively to associations B through Z, right? So you're often not going to get that from the self-managed association because they're only going through each item one time. Whether it's an insurance renewal, whether it's a 40-year certification, whether it's a concrete project, any of those things, you're almost always going to be the guinea pig versus a company like Castle, you know, hey, I just went through this and it was a pain. So if you're going to do this, let's make sure you set yourself up for success ahead of time, right? So to me, you know, it's tough to say cookie cutter, okay, if you have 500 units, you should be professionally managed, or if you have less, you can be self-managed. I don't think it's so much that. I think it's really, you know, what are you looking for as an association? What do you need to rely on? Because if you're a brand new building and you've only got 25 units and, you know, 2 of the board members don't work and they're fine with being available for those 30, 40 hours a week, like Jessica mentioned, maybe you're fine being self-managed, right? But I think you need to look at a unique perspective for each individual association versus just kind of saying, here, blanket, this is the threshold.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. Yvonne, did you want to add anything, or should we move on to the next question?
I think Jordan hit upon the topic and quite well, but the one thing that I would like to add with regards to what a board member should, or what board should be looking at, is their time. I think, Jessica, you mentioned that, and I think that that's probably pretty much one of the main considerations, is that do you as board members have the time to put in to assist a manager, a self-managed manager, whether it be someone that you hire as an employee of the association or another board member to do it. And what do those time constraints of your personal life look like, and will it impact the association? I see what the associations that we see that transfer or move from self-managed to professional, a lot of times it is because of the time dedication that board members have to put in, above and beyond what they normally do as board members. And I think that that needs to be a major consideration for boards move as they make a determination as what works for them.
Yes. And I want to address here an anonymous attendee. You're absolutely right. This webinar, we're making the case for professional management, but we have formidable competitors. And the reality is, whether you choose Castle or any one of our, competitors in the industry, the metric is your quality of life, is your resident experience better, right? If it's not, then it's probably not the management company you should have gone to, but generally that's what you're going to see. If you go to a good, reputable management company, your experience is going to be much, much better for the board and for the residents, and also the vendors and service providers who work with you, right? All of that should get better.
And Jessica, to a little bit to that is that, when you have a self-managed, and let's just say the community, the board doesn't like that property manager, then the board has to go out and hire somebody, and it takes time, and then there's more on their plate. When you have Castle, if there's an issue, or maybe the property manager gets sick, or for whatever reason, it's a plug and play. There's always somebody else at Castle Group that can come in and fill the situation, where you're not having to go out and look for a new hire, which could take, who knows, a couple of weeks, months. But with Castle, you have the backing that they can drop in a regional or another property manager
an account manager. Yep. Mark, yeah. I'm bringing you to my next sales pitch. Thank you. That was great. Yeah. So let's talk about the challenges in the management approaches. Okay. So this one is more targeted towards Yvonne and Jordan, but James, of course, we always want to hear from you, but specifically from the service providers, challenges and potential pitfalls of self-managed communities. We mentioned a few, but do you have any of maybe, professional experience or something that you come across quite often that you just want to warn people about?
So it's not necessarily a warning, it's just a consideration. When you're dealing with a self-managed association, the association itself needs to be aware of who's managing them and what is that person that's actually filling that management role. When you have a professional management company that manages an association, it's really a third party, an agent kind of system or an agent kind of interaction. It's hands off. It's supposed to be third party. You've got a management company who's there to represent you and is an agent of the association, a fiduciary. Turning back to a self-managed, what you see a lot of times, and what I have seen, is that your self-managed associations are usually managed by somebody who resides within that community, and that itself can create issues with regards to the community. If another owner doesn't like what the manager has said to them in a self-managed community, they tend to take it very personally, because number one, they're dealing not only with a manager of the association, but they're dealing with their neighbor. And so what I have seen, unfortunately, is that things that should be simple and easy to address tend to escalate to levels that they shouldn't, because there's this personality or somebody who's living within close quarters with you, and there is no separation. So, in certain ways it can be good, because that person knows everything about the community and knows everything about the association. In other respects, I think that it can definitely be a pitfall if it's not managed and it's not addressed correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I see that there was a question from Lena Jones there. Can a board member who acts as a manager get paid? Going kind of directly to what Yvonne just said, that just creates a situation where, you've, just like she mentioned, you've got one person that is pulling some of the strings, making some decisions, and it's almost inevitable that at some point in time, some other unit owner or resident is going to feel like they're being mistreated or that they're not being treated fairly because of XYZ. And then that's the last thing that the board wants to do, because again, you know, the board is initially volunteers. If they move into the management role, now you've got, I don't want to call it a necessary conflict of interest, but you've got a lot of different frustrations coming to a head at once. And I think
Well,
it
it
just
becomes
creates a very
personal.
difficult atmosphere.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
becomes very
interesting.
personal.
We Millie and I had a presentation actually last night, and this was a topic about, you know, the self-managed association. They've got a fairly large staff, and there are issues where the manager, how do you hold that manager accountable? Well, the manager reports to the board, and the board is that governing body to say you're either performing well or not. And it's a difficult thing because sometimes the board member says, oh, but I love her for the last 15 years and she's so sweet. And then you've got the maintenance tech who is endearing the other owners and not the board members and doing things on the side. And it's difficult, right? And so that was a theme that we actually had last night to talk about. They were asking us, the self-managed board was asking us, you know, how do you deal with these things? And our answer was easy. It was just like, well, because they report to us when Castle Group comes in. And we take that burden off of the board because it is, you know, we talk about board conflict, team conflict. That's why you have a code of conduct that Yvonne will work on for resolutions. It can get very sticky and contentious, but I think at the end of the day, you know, best practices all fall in line with an expectation set, very clear and consistent communications, providing those communications to both team and homeowners on civility and a code of conduct. And at the end of the day, you know, you have a few of those naysayers, they start to fall in line because there are also consequences, right? Whether they be legal consequences or other. And you just have to have that adherence to your rules and regs so that you have better harmony. But that was a big discussion last night for sure. They're dealing with it daily, and that's a big decision for them to make a move to professional management. Is they don't have time to do it, right? It's a big imposition to them, and it's a lot of time to deal with their staff when they have other things that they need to do as a board.
And James, so let's say, you know, there's a self-managed property and maybe they can't afford a professional management company or the community's just not ready. Do you have any strategies that, you know, I know you mentioned some, but anything specifically to those board members that are trying to do it without a management company?
Just in terms of like looking for cost savings?
Cost savings, or like you said, you know, HR, dealing with employees, things of that nature.
Yeah, there's so many aspects, right? And a lot of times when we come in, the two big pain points for self-managed associations are we're trying to mitigate risk and it's over our head. And that's when they're coming to the realization that they're on an island and that manager is that island, and that manager can't go to, right, accounts receivable or human resources or technology and IT and all these different departments that a full service professional managed firm has. And so those are those pain points we go into. But our approach is, because of our size and our experiences, we always say that we can usually come in cost neutral, that we don't affect any extra cost effectiveness to your budget. But at the same time, as we talked about with insurance, we can find savings in various line items. So an example is the benefits for the employees. Another example is what projects we can do at a better market rate with better performance because of our vendor management aspect that they don't have. You know, the legal updates, the legislative updates, the budget seasons, all those things, again, they're on that island of technology and island of financial acumen where they have a whole resource of 500 plus associations. So I think it's really talking about all the little things. Even technology is one, right? The self-associations that are managed themselves, they're dealing with technology the only way that they know. And if that manager doesn't have a strong technology background or the board doesn't, they're going to be limited on what workflows they have, what technology, what compliance, what controls they have. You know, we talked about last night at the association again. Another case in point is their big pet peeve was we just don't feel like we have any controls. So we talk about technology being an enabler to put workflow and approvals and quality control processes in place to actually get to when you're going to pay a vendor and is it the right vendor. So many things come into play that hit, I think, the time the board spends, having better access to technology, to finance and accounting, the legislative updates, the vendor management pieces. those are all small examples that become big time drains and then cost inefficiencies for the self-managed associations.
Thank you, James. And you mentioned compliance, so I want to give this to Yvonne for the legal perspective here. But what do you feel these self-managed boards can do for effective community governance, compliance, and just overall management? I know that can be a pain point for self-managed communities.
Yeah. Well, obviously you want to follow your association's governing documents. Those are your compliance strongholds. They're the set of documents in which your association needs to operate. Additionally,
you mean the board member has to read a packet this big of
yeah.
Okay, got it. All right.
Yeah, it's supposed to, it's understood in condominium law and HOA law, and as also to cooperatives, that your board knows what your association's governing documents are. And if you don't, you're relying on somebody to assist. A property manager can, say, hey, this is how we've done it in the past, but obviously legal counsel is the one who would assist the board in interpreting those large set of documents. But, one of the items that I think I saw pop up in the questions is compensation for a board member who is running or who is managing. That can be a conflict of interest in accordance with the Florida statutes regarding condominium associations. And in that instance, the actual action of having a board member receive compensation for their own benefit requires certain type of approval rights and approval methods. So, there are concerns there. Additionally, you have employee related concerns. Associations are small businesses in the sense that, when you're dealing with employee related matters, they can become big time headaches and problems, especially if you're dealing with discrimination claims or improper hiring, onboarding, or firing issues. So, all of that is a concern with regards to self-managed associations and things that an association needs to look out for.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to ask this to, I guess, the panel in general. What specific financial advantages or disadvantages have you observed between self-managed and professionally managed condominiums? We talked about economies of scale, but other than that, have we seen anything else that disadvantages them financially with both management approaches?
I guess one thing that comes to my mind, Jess, is we talked about it earlier, but not in depth. Vendor management is huge to me, and I know huge for Castle Group and the value of being a professional managed firm. But those associations that are self-managed, they're limited, right? Because they're really 100% reliant upon the manager or the board members having an alliance or a network or a vendor to go to. Mm-hmm. And that's extremely difficult, as we know, in this marketplace where you're trying to find a licensed and insured and properly vetted vendor. That's one thing. But do they actually show up and are they capable and can they do the job? And those aspects are important. And so as a self-managed firm, that's another pain point that we typically hear, where they just don't have that access that we would have. And then really to make sure that you're getting fair market pricing. And, the benefit of doing thousands of projects, right, is we know who's out there, who should be doing it, who should not be doing it, and making sure that the industry standards are there, their contracts, their terms are relevant, the specs are correct. And then, of course, having the property doing projects of benchmarking that we know if it's not only in market rate, but are they doing it down the street, and have they done it successfully? And I think that all those things come back to the overarching pain points of vendor management as a whole, is you want a quality job and you want it done at the right price. And it's very difficult for you to do if you're an entity of one manager and relying upon that one manager to really get that type of horsepower in as a value add. So that's one of the bigger pain points we typically hear from self-managed associations wanting to move to professional.
Well, that was a great segue into vendor management. So I think Millie has some questions regarding the SIRS and the milestone inspections and things of that nature. Millie, what was it that we were discussing that you wanted to bring up? Oh, I think you're on mute, Millie. That always happens at least once in every webinar.
I apologize. I was actually typing some answers. So I was like, let me mute myself so you don't hear my typing. Yes, Jess. With the milestone inspection and search around the corner, what is the process like when bidding, assessing, and managing vendors in both approaches?
Well, I can take that, at least with regards to setting up vendors to do your reserve studies and now getting engineers out to your communities to do their inspections. You know, we've scraped the bottom of the bucket, so to speak, with available resources to assist associations. I have associations reaching out to me and saying, "Oh my God, Yvonne, I can't get a reserve study done until 2025. What are you going to do? What are we going to do?" You know, that's an association that has resources in the sense that they have a network of people that they can reach out to. They have you know, a professionally managed association where their management company is saying to them, well, you know, all of our people that we're calling are booked up. So, you know, when you're in a self-managed situation and you have to make those calls, well, guess what you're doing all day long for the next couple of weeks, right? You're calling almost every single reserve study specialist that you know to try and get them to come in, and you're getting the same answer. So you're kind of like, it's unfortunately in that sense, you know, the new legislative changes are going to have a big impact on associations. And I think administratively, it puts a strain on associations. Now, that's just with regards to, you know, getting those reports done. What about waiving reserves? What about associations that went ahead for years and were waiving reserves and now are not going to have that same ability? You know, how does your manager, is your manager able to shift and understand the new legislative changes? And by the way, they're still changing, right? You've got legislative sessions that are going on now. I guarantee that there are going to be more changes coming down the pike, you know, because nothing stays stagnant in this area of law for long. So, you know, ultimately it's keeping up with those changes and having your association the ability to keep up with that. And I think that's where it's critical with regards to the difference between the types of associations and how they're managed.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And since we're in the topic of vendor, and Yvonne, this is for you. When an association runs into a dispute or an issue with a vendor, is there a difference between self-managed and professionally managed associations?
Sometimes there is. In certain respects, when you have the ability of having a vendor network and you have a professionally managed association that has a professional management company that has contacts and abilities to address the issue beyond just the association, that can be of assistance. When you're sitting as a self-managed association and you know, there tends to be obviously a personalization of issues a lot of times in what we see, right? So a property manager is sitting out there, and it could be whether self-managed or professional, but they're having a problem with the vendor. They are trying their hardest to get answers from the vendor, and the vendor is not being responsive in you know, in many instances. And the property manager is just, I'm fed up. Like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm going to go bring this to legal counsel and have them address it. We step in and we assist. You know, the problem becomes the person who's resolving it on behalf of the association. Your property manager is frustrated. Your board of directors is frustrated. Nobody wants to hear, hey, let's try and resolve this in a certain way. Let's not, like, you know, make this more antagonistic. A lot of times when you have the ability of vendor management, you have a professional management company that can assist. I can call up a vice president or a regional director and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this vendor. Have you had issues before? Any chance you can get me in contact with somebody so that I could talk to, that I can kind of work this out with them? It helps. It's just, it's another avenue of resolution.
110% agree with you on this one, Yvonne. I used to be a regional director for Castle, and that was a major part of my role. Was when there was a problem with just with a vendor, the board would typically call me and ask me to step in, and then I would just step in, speak with the vendor, try to resolve it without getting legal involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Jordan, are there any factors that contribute to the variance in property insurance premiums between professionally managed condominiums and self-managed ones? And how can each approach optimize insurance coverage while minimizing costs?
Yeah, I would say, you know, from just like a rating perspective with the insurance carriers, there's not going to be a huge difference on some of those policies that I listed earlier. Now, obviously, you know, if you are self-managed and you employ the property manager and the maintenance guys and the landscapers, you know, you're going to have a larger premium for your workers' compensation because those are your workers instead of them being Castle Groups or another, you know, another management companies. So you will incur a little bit of a cost there. But from the underwriting perspective of your property or your general liability, those things aren't typically directly affected by the answer. Now, where they are affected is, and it's, you know, very timely that we're going through this right now. We just took over a new association that's self-managed in Hollandale, and they don't have any of the documentation prior to 2 years ago when the new board came in. So we're going through shopping for insurance right now. They don't know who the carriers were. They don't know where to find claims history from. So it makes the process more difficult because there was a manager there for a long time and now they're no longer there. And similarly, you know, somebody mentioned the recertifications. Again, you know, some of the research are 10 years old now, right? So if you had something done in 2014 and you're redoing it now or you're getting recertified now, if you don't have the same property manager, it's pretty difficult to find some of those documents. Again, I mentioned earlier, you know, we're actually going through a situation right now with an association on Fort Lauderdale Beach where we're trying to contact an engineer that did a recertification 12 years ago. And it's very difficult to track down an engineering company that, you know, they store thousands, if not millions of documents, right? So going back to them and what that's doing now is it's blocking us off from getting certain quotes for the association. So again, you know, and I wanna point this out because someone had mentioned this earlier. Lynn Endress had said, you know, she felt inferior as an 8-year CAM from a self-managed community. That's not our goal, but Lynn, I could imagine that throughout your 8 years, and it might have been, you know, when you first came onto the property, you were probably looking for certain items that you just couldn't necessarily access because whoever you took over from might not have labeled them or put them in the exact position that you wanted them. So typically, everything is great with a self-managed community if you have the same property manager for a long time and they're good, right? If that's the case, you know, the old adage is if it's not broke, don't fix it. We see that a lot. Where the heartache comes in is when you've had a manager on site for 10 or 12 years and they are that end all be all person that James has mentioned and Jessica's mentioned, right? They're your go-to, they're your rock. Heaven forbid they move, they get a new job, they retire. Any of those things happen, now you're going back starting from scratch. And if the next person doesn't know where to go for all these items, you know, that's the trickle down effect that we've mentioned a couple times. And the end result is, hey, I get blocked off from this carrier, so I can't get a quote. Now my premium increases 25 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand, you know, whatever those items are. So those are some of the heartaches we see versus having, you know, a clean cut data management system that you got a lot of oversight on, right? So if the manager is not doing it correctly, I've gotten emails from Castle Corporate that say, hey, my manager already asked you for this document. Now I'm asking you for this document because it's not there, right? So there's checks and balances in place that you might not have from some of the self-managed associations that is only going to benefit the association from a document perspective in the long term.
Great. We have like 3 more questions about transition that I want to really get in here because there were some questions from the chat related to transition, and Jessica's going to pick those up. But in the interest of time, we have 5 minutes for those to be addressed, and then we move on to the live Q&A. Jess?
Yeah, we have some good ones. I was answering questions, so I'm excited to discuss some of those. But very quickly, Yvonne, this always comes up when you're transitioning from self-managed to professionally managed. Who makes that decision? Is it the board? Is it the community and the members, or both?
It's the board. The board of directors is the threshold, the approval ability for selecting a management company for the association.
Fantastic. And James, what does the transition look like, you know, in terms of the physical facility, employees, accounting?
It's a lot, but it's something we do well and we really premise upfront in talking to communities. And it's really it's a reason we were innovators of a dedicated transition department. And the reason we did that is because it used to be years back, very disruptive and challenging. And Jordan made a great point about, kind of garbage in, garbage out. You don't know what's digitized or not. You don't know what collective historical documents and information you have. Is it in a box in a warehouse, right? And so all those things are very challenging in a transition, but that's our job to, filter those things, organize them, label them, digitize them, and then get everything into a cohesive fashion. But, from an expectation set, we work very hard in the transition department, which is why we have a dedicated director of transition, a director of transition accounting, an account specialist for the region, transition specialist. And we put all those resources in place because we don't want to be disruptive to the day-to-day property management, which starts day one when we start. A lot of the work is actually done before we have our actual start date. And so that critical pathing, all the tasks that are associated with transition, we take that, own that. We have a weekly call and we go through all those, the cadence of needs without disrupting both the board and the on-site team. So transition can be very difficult if you don't have a dedicated team. But that's kind of what it looks like before and during, after the start date, with all the different accounting and operational organizational aspects.
Awesome. What are some challenges when transitioning from self-management to professional management or vice versa? And how can these hurdles be addressed to ensure smooth and successful transition?
Well, I think I answered some of those. But that's really what it is if you don't have a plan and a roadmap and clear ownership on who owns what to get the task done, those are those transitionary pain points that come if you really haven't gone through those time and time again. And obviously there's issues and mistakes, and those are lessons learned that you incorporate for the next time so that you really fine-tune how to get from good to great, right? But I think that's really those challenges are more of an expectation set. Talking to the board and the community, and you guys know on the Castle team, and you probably, Jordan and Mark and Yvonne, too, just from maybe being at some of our meetings, we're very big on doing, the welcome letter, the meet and greet, the coffees with Castle, the town halls, and all those ancillary things are an opportunity to not only communicate, but to set expectations on what to expect and when, because those are those challenges. They don't know what's going to happen. So I think the expectation set is a huge opportunity to get in front of things, talk to the board and the membership about this is what's going to come and when. And then there's a little bit more cohesiveness because they're in the know versus in the dark.
Awesome. All right. So let's get into some questions. I'm wondering, do you want to take some of these, Aileen? Do you want me to start with them? We have some good ones, and I'm wondering, where should we start? I mean, our queue is
if we can start with I think this is going to be broad because I think it's all about this is one of the main topics that people will probably bring up. How does self-management get the trust and avoid conflicts or perception of conflicts?
I think it's, it has a lot to do with building transparency and going back to, what James mentioned, having kind of a segregation of duties and making sure that, if you're going to be self-managed, build committees, within your unit owners and within your board, even depending on the size of the board of directors, because now you don't want to make it so robust that decisions can't be made. We all know that if you've got 15 people in a room trying to agree on something, you'll be there until the end of time. But at the same point, let's rely on groups of people versus one individual, because I noticed that somebody had mentioned on the questions and answered that it seemed like, there was some fraudulent activity and things were running rampant. Vendors were giving kickbacks and things like that. Typically, you see that when one person manages everything and keeps everybody else away from it, right? And we've seen it so many times. Everybody on this call has seen it. I'm sure Yvonne's been knee deep in some litigation with that over the years. I know Castle has obtained certain accounts because they were self-managed prior, and that was the situation going on was, hey, our landscaping vendor sucks. Our HVAC vendor sucks, and they've been here for 20 years, and everybody complains about them, and it's never anybody different. That's typically the song and dance that we hear. You know, sometimes it's about the insurance people, sometimes it's about the accountant or the attorney. But it's always kind of the same song is, oh, hey, well, we don't like them. They don't provide good service, but for some reason, they're still our vendor after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So I think if you have that segregation of duties and you say, okay, you over here, obtain those bids, interview the vendors, right? You know, and somebody else asked about, does Castle have a list of approved vendors? I don't know that they have a list of approved vendors, but they've got a lot of people that they can rely on to say, hey, have you worked with Brown & Brown before? Have you worked with Siegfried Rivera before? Okay, well, if I can get 10 or 12 people on my team to say, hey, we've worked with them and had great experiences, okay, it kind of lowers my alert a little bit. Versus again, with the other side is sometimes you're relying on one person to do everything. And if that person's holding all the cards and nobody else can see what they're doing, you know, it leaves a situation where that can become pretty prevalent.
Good point.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Jordan. What are the best practices to keep board members from micromanaging a quite competent professional management company and giving them ongoing challenges to managing the association? Where's the line? Where do they draw the line here?
Ooh, I'll take that one. We talk about often, right, the responsibilities and we talk about time blocking. And time blocking is one of those elements where we want to give the board the opportunity to be in the know and have knowledge of what's going on, but we also want our managers to time block as well so that they can do the job that the board wants them to do. And I think that it's not only a fine line, but it's in the way that we provide updates and communication. So as an example, when you have a weekly report and you have a weekly action list that's sent to the board and the community every Friday, now they are in the know and there's an alignment and there's transparency on what's being done, whether that be construction or projects or finance or team or administratively, events, etc. So when the board seems to have a high degree of confidence that they're in the know and they can see the before and after pictures and see the work being done, I think that that's a big game changer for us that we've done years ago, because whether you're at the property, it's a second or third home, it's seasonal, you're traveling, you're wherever you're at, you're going to get that report and the action list, and you just have a sense of what's being done because you can actually see it. And then you're going to spend less time thinking that you're having to micromanage because you've got a competent manager, but you also have competent tools and reports that show the work that's being done, which at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that the day-to-day tasks and work is being done. And that's the way that we do that with the form of our reports and our communication. So I think that helps avoid the idea of always wanting to be in that officer, the manager's office and always wanting to get updates. Well, you don't have to do that when you have good communication. So that takes the place of that.
Thank you, James.
Aileen, there's one here that is interesting that I'd actually like to answer, and if anyone else wants to hop on it, that's great too. But Levon Watson here asks, a simple cost benefit analysis would, for me, bring sense to this discussion. Is there a chart that shows that? Absolutely. In the end, it's a matter of money to homeowners. As one of the latter, what's the delta cost of PM and the upward exposure for not having them? This is an excellent question because you're right. At the end, it's about metrics and it's measuring if we are bringing value to the association. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because I recently submitted a benchmarking analysis for a bid that was requested. And this is a self-managed property, okay? And what's very interesting is that when you look at all the major expenses and the cost to each unit, we tend to be lower because of our negotiating power, because of our ability to foresee certain things where you're not having to call Yvonne for the tiniest little things, right? Because we could kind of help guide you a little bit. I mean, it's just incredible. And we actually do have that data. So I'd love for you to give us a call and we'd be more than happy to put a benchmarking analysis for you. And you could see like in real time in black and white exactly what the cost savings are. Like James said earlier, we tend to neutralize that budget. So even if it seems like it might be more, with all the savings that we bring to the table, it ends up being like net zero. So thank you, Mr. Watson. That was an excellent question.
How are we doing on time?
We are at our 4-minute mark.
Okay.
So to be respectful of everyone's time, the recording of this webinar will be in Castle Group's website. So here's some information on our panel of experts, just in case you want to reach out for further questions, you may do that as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for our panel of experts for all the insightful information that you provided today. Please feel free to submit any further questions to info@castlegroup.com and follow us on social media. This is our QR code, so you can also log in and view our library of webinars and resources as well. And thank you all so much for today.
That's
Thank
been
you.
great.
Thank you very much.
everybody.
Does anyone
you.
have any closing remarks?
Um,
Jordan, Yvonne, James?
I guess again, I want to really thank Brown and Brown and Siegfried. You know, we at Castle Group, we talk about we're vendor agnostic. You know, we don't have any affiliation with any of the vendors out there, but we really believe in promoting those vendors that perform at a high level, because it's our name that's on the line. But at the end of the day, we want execution and results for our board members. And you know, Jordan, Mark, and Yvonne, you guys are not only incredible companies to work with, but you know, you have the same type of cultural drive that we do: subscription to values, ethics, responsiveness. Like, these are the things that customers and board members want and deserve, and you guys are an extension of that. So we at Castle Group are so fortunate to have you as partners. There's lots of different insurance companies and attorneys out there, and everybody has their own opinion and option at the end of the day. But you guys are at the top of the list with the work that you do respectively in your region. So I'm really, really appreciative of the work you do for our clients.
Absolutely.
We appreciate
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much.
Yep. We want to give the royal service, the royal treatment to everybody, and that's what we're here for. You know, it's bringing the partnerships together. It's that community, the trust that you can have with the vendors. And you know, when you lean on everybody, the vendors, you bring that royal service treatment that, you know, you guys love.
That's great. Awesome.
Thank you all once again. Thank you for everyone who attended as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
See you
Have a great
guys.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.